It's definitely time to talk about what is going on in Australia as we get closer and closer to the 2022 Australian Open. Now, I'm going to set a couple of ground rules before I get into this. The first one being, I am not going to give my opinion on Australian politics. I would not give my opinion on any country's politics on this channel. I don't think I would give my opinion on American politics, so I'm definitely not going to talk about Australia's political business. The second thing I'm not going to do is discuss the efficacy of the vaccine. In my opinion, you should be listening to other people, definitely not me, on the efficacy of the vaccine, and therefore I'm not going to talk about how I feel about the efficacy of the vaccine. I will say, for the sake of not being hypocritical in this video, I am vaccinated. The third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my time and allow this story to develop before I come out here and cover it. And I've done that because over the course of the last couple weeks, there have been a lot of different twists and turns to this story. And the reason for that has been a lot of people are putting out information to push their own agendas. But I think now is a good time where everyone has gotten their piece in, gotten their leaks in, has said what they needed to say, and it's time to evaluate the situation so we can diagnose what potentially may happen as we approach the Australian Open 2022. The first thing that happened earlier this week was the WTA sent out an email to all of their players. And obviously, the email was going to be leaked. That's how this works. You cannot send an email to hundreds of athletes without some of the athletes giving that email to journalists. So that happened and it was leaked, and here's what it said. It said that the conditions for fully vaccinated players are that they can arrive anytime after December 1st. They must have a negative test within 72 hours of departure. They must test within 24 hours of arrival. But then after that, they're pretty much free. They're not required to quarantine or stay in a bubble. They will have no ongoing restrictions imposed on them, and they will have complete freedom of movement. So, with the exception of testing once before they leave, testing again once they arrive, then they're basically free and they can have a normal major. The email also said that for unvaccinated players, the conditions would be fairly different. They can arrive anytime after December 1st, but will be subject to 2 weeks hard quarantine. They must have a negative test within 72 hours, just like the vaccinated, and are required to go through mandatory hotel quarantine for 14 days upon arrival and must submit to regular testing. So regular testing, 14 days hard quarantine. That is what the WTA came out and told their players. However, that is not necessarily true because what we have in reality is the WTA not in charge of what happens here, but rather the Australian government. And the Australian government is not in alignment for what they need to do. Figures, politicians, not agreeing on things, but that's what we have. So I'm going to break it down for you. The Australian Prime Minister's name is Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison would like to let unvaccinated athletes into the country with the 14-day quarantine. He's the Prime Minister of Australia. The Prime Minister of Victoria, which is the territory that Melbourne is located in, does not want to allow any unvaccinated people into the country. And so does the Immigration Minister, Alex Hawke. So Alex Hawke and Daniel Andrews say no exemptions. We will not provide an exemption for athletes because currently the rule in Australia is that if you're not vaccinated, you may not enter the country. And those two do not want to give an exception for tennis players, but the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, does. Now, who has the jurisdiction here? My understanding is that it's actually Victorian Prime Minister Daniel Andrews who will actually have the final say here. And Andrews has said, quote, "I am not going to ask and require people sitting in the grandstand, people working at the event to be vaccinated while players aren't." By the way, that was the case at the US Open and Indian Wells. There have been many tournaments where that has happened, where the workers and the audience members have had to be vaccinated and the players have not. And Daniel Andrews doesn't sound very interested in that. Now, the reality of all of this is this may not matter because when I've been in tennis circles discussing Australia with coaches, with former players, I don't think I've talked to any current players about this, but all of them pretty much agree that the 14-day hard quarantine is pretty much non-negotiable this year. And while it was accepted in 2020, there aren't going to be a lot of players, by all these accounts, there aren't going to be a lot of players who actually accept those conditions and decide not to be vaccinated, travel to Australia anyways, and quarantine for 14 days. So does it really matter here if Scott Morrison gets his way and unvaccinated players can come to Australia and quarantine, or if Daniel Andrews and Alex Hawke get their way and there are no exemptions? It might not matter at all. But this is where we currently stand. Now, this story, believe it or not, is not a Novak Djokovic story. And I know that is hard to believe based on how most media, or I don't know if most media, but many media has covered this as a story that revolves around Novak Djokovic. The reality is, the latest numbers from the ATP and the WTA suggest that between 60 and 65% of the tours are vaccinated, and the other 30 to 35% are not. That's the latest data that The Age, a reputable Australian newspaper, was able to obtain from the tours themselves. So 30 to 35% of players, that is a very, very significant number, and it goes beyond Novak Djokovic. And I find it pretty pathetic that this story has been covered as a Novak Djokovic story, because in reality, it really shouldn't be covered that way. This is not a Djokovic problem. And once again, he bears the brunt of too much of this. It is vilification. It is obviously Novak, representing an opportunity for more casual, non-tennis people to care about the story. Djokovic is a big name. He's going to get more traffic, more clicks. And I do think that is something that is taken advantage of to some extent. With that being said, Djokovic is a part of this story, a significant part. And while I don't think that it should headline these stories, and while I don't think it should be the focus of these stories, it is a part of it, because Djokovic is, along with, Aryna Sabalenka, pretty big deal on the women's side. Daniil Medvedev, pretty big deal on the men's side. Based on his comments, it kind of sounds like he's going to get vaccinated, but he doesn't seem happy about it. Andrei Rublev has said he would. But there are a lot of significant players who are on the fence here. Djokovic, the biggest name, the most public, and the most important as far as the history that he's chasing. So now towards the end of this video, I will finally get to Djokovic, although I don't approve of how this story has been covered as a Djokovic story. And that comes from someone who is not going to be completely pro-Djokovic on all of these points. But before I get into what Novak said, another thing that I will say right off the bat, I am not going to give my opinion on whether or not Novak is vaccinated, because we're about to find out. We're about to find out in 2 months. So why the heck, what would be the point of that? Just wait and see, and then we'll see. That's it. So I'm not going to give my opinion on, and I do have one. It's in my brain. I'm just not going to say it. Everyone has one. Come on. Everybody has an opinion on if they think he's vaccinated or not. Here's what he said. He said, "I won't disclose whether I am vaccinated or not. Too many people will allow themselves the freedom to ask and then to judge. Whatever you say, I have not. Maybe I do not know, or I am thinking about it. They will use it against you." Then he went on to say, there is excessive speculation from the media as well, which bothers me a lot. I have spoken too much on vaccination because everyone was making assumptions based on something I have said a year ago. Not only in sports, but in the world in general, I am disappointed with the discord being made between the vaccinated and unvaccinated people. And while I will not give an opinion on if I think Djokovic is vaccinated or not, I will address some of the points that Novak made here. The first being, is it appropriate to ask athletes whether or not they are vaccinated? Novak went on to say that he thinks it's an inappropriate inquiry. And I don't agree with that. This is an issue that directly affects sports. So as someone who covers tennis, it is the obligation of a journalist who covers tennis, given the fact that at the Australian Open, you may not be able to play if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated. It is a perfectly fair question to ask a player if they're vaccinated or not, because it directly affects exactly what they're covering. So I don't agree that it's an inappropriate inquiry at all. That is just journalists doing their jobs. They have to ask Novak this because it could directly affect the Australian Open and whether or not he plays. So I don't think it's a bad question. I want to address two more things here about what Djokovic said. He said they will use it against you, whatever you say. I have not, maybe, I do not know. I am thinking about it. They will use it against you. What Novak is saying here is that the reason he doesn't want to say anything is because he fears the backlash that he might receive from the public, media, whatever. And I get that. And based on how he's been treated throughout his career, you can't blame him for that. But I disagree with one part of this, which is that if he were vaccinated, he would get backlash. I don't agree with that because the whole essence of anti-vaccination is freedom of choice. The whole essence of people who are against the vaccine, they are against vaccine mandates. They are against anything that forces them to take the vaccine. But their whole essence of argumentation is that everyone should get to decide. So people who are anti-vaccination, I have not seen them ever criticize someone for getting vaccinated. So I actually don't think the backlash, and maybe this would exist in Serbia, and this is a problem of me being blindsided by my American perspective, but I actually don't think that this whole thing is true. The whatever you say, I'm going to get criticized. I don't think that's true. I only really think you get criticized if you're anti-vaccination. I've never seen, Federer got the vaccine, Nadal got the vaccine. Yes, they both get more favorable media coverage than Djokovic, but nobody had anything negative to say about them getting vaccinated. So I don't really agree with Novak there. There's one other thing that I want to say about what Novak said, which is that there is excessive speculation. Unfortunately, the result of being private and secretive, which is Novak's right to do, the result of that is you invite the speculation. And this is always going to be true, whether it be an injury, whether it be a tactic in a tennis match, if you had to retire from a match, or if you didn't look right and you decide not to disclose what the issue was in press. Whenever you are not upfront and transparent, you invite speculation. That is just how this works. It is natural human nature. It is not anything that I think anyone is at fault for. It's just how this works. So Novak needs to make his choice here. He's either going to not tell anyone until he absolutely has to and accept the consequences that there's going to be speculation, or he can be upfront and open and then maybe face a different sort of repercussions for that. Now, maybe he's in a position where it's lose-lose. I don't know. Whatever it is, I don't care to go any further than that on this, because at the end of the day, people can talk about Novak and speculate why. There's no reason to speculate on this because we're going to find out. We're about to find out. So if there are any other developments in this situation that are significant, I will cover it and we will go from there. But right now, I think I've painted a decent picture of where we're at right now. It might not matter if it's 14 days or unvaccinated. Australian government is fighting. The WTA email means nothing. Djokovic has been too big a part of this story. It's a lot of players in Novak's camp, a ton of them. And at the same time, Novak has said some things that I think are disagreeable with. Some may agree, some may disagree. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.